Christmas dinner was supposed to be warm, loud, and full of laughter. Instead, it turned into a tribunal. I had worked quietly for years, taking double shifts, skipping vacations, living below my means, to save enough for a down payment on a small property. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. When I casually mentioned it over turkey and wine, the room went silent. Then came the looks, half disbelief, half accusation. My mother's voice cut through the clatter of silverware. "You need to put it in your sister's name. She deserves it more than you." The demand wasn't a joke. They were dead serious. My sister, who had never held down a steady job, stared at me like it was already hers. The chorus rose: guilt, manipulation, entitlement. They wanted to strip away everything I had earned, simply because I hadn't spoken about the sacrifices it took. That night, I realized my family wasn't celebrating me. They were circling me like vultures. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 34 years old, single, and I work as a systems analyst for a mid-sized logistics firm. My job isn't glamorous. It's long hours of poring over spreadsheets, network logs, and data flow diagrams that most people would find mind-numbing. But I've always had a talent for spotting inefficiencies, for tightening systems until they run with clean precision. And in a way, that skill bled into my personal life too. For more than a decade, I lived in a kind of slow-motion discipline. I brewed coffee at home instead of stopping at Starbucks, even when the office smelled of fresh espresso from the lobby cafe. I drove an old 2006 Toyota Corolla until the transmission was more duct tape than steel, because a car note meant wasted money. Vacations? I skipped them. My coworkers posted beach photos on Instagram. I spent summers on my balcony with a library book, a fan, and a cheap six-pack. All of it, every sacrifice, every delayed gratification, was for one thing: ownership. In September of last year, after years of not yet and maybe next year, I finally signed the papers. A modest 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, 30 minutes from my job. It wasn't fancy: white siding in need of a power wash, a cracked driveway, and a backyard that had been neglected into a small jungle. But it was mine. Paid for with a down payment I'd scraped together from bonuses, overtime, and savings accounts I'd guarded like a dragon hoards gold. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my coworkers, and definitely not my family. I wanted to savor it in silence. To spend those first few weekends mowing my own lawn, painting my own walls, fixing my own leaky faucet, without anyone's input or judgment. But then Christmas came. The Cross family Christmas dinner is an event. My parents still live in the same suburban house I grew up in, a 2-story with green shutters and a dining room dominated by an old oak table scarred by decades of hot plates and knife marks. Every year, my mother insists on cooking everything from scratch. The smell of roasting turkey hits you the second you open the door. Rosemary, sage, onions caramelizing in butter, it's intoxicating, familiar. This year was no different. I arrived with a bottle of red wine I knew my father would ignore in favor of beer, and within minutes the house was alive with noise. My Uncle Richard was already holding court in the living room, boasting about some new investment property he'd flipped in record time. My Aunt Laura was loudly criticizing the gravy before it even hit the table. And Emily, my younger sister, was at her usual spot on the couch, scrolling through her phone, earbuds in one ear, pretending to laugh at something her friends sent. Dinner itself was loud, chaotic, and familiar. The clink of silverware, the scrape of chairs, my father carving turkey with exaggerated precision while my mother darted in and out with fresh dishes. Conversation jumped from politics to weather to football scores. Then, somewhere between mashed potatoes and pumpkin pie, the subject of money came up. It always does. Uncle Richard was bragging again, something about tripling returns on a stock pick. My father muttered about rising property taxes. And then, out of nowhere, my cousin Jason turned to me and said, "So, Daniel, you still throwing money away on rent?" I should have deflected. I should have shrugged it off. But maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the relief of finally being able to share my secret, maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of always keeping quiet. Whatever it was, I smiled and said, "Actually, I bought a place this year." The room went silent. Not a pause for breath silent, but dead silent. Forks froze midway to mouths. Even the clink of glasses stopped. I looked around and saw disbelief written on their faces. "You bought a house?" my mother asked, her voice sharp, like I'd confessed to a crime. "A small one," I said quickly. "Nothing fancy. Just a property outside of town." Emily's phone slid from her hand onto the table with a soft thud. She stared at me wide-eyed, then broke into a slow, curling smile. It wasn't joy for me, it was something else. Expectation. Calculation. And that's when my mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, her voice dropping into a tone I hadn't heard since childhood. You need to put it in Emily's name. She deserves it more than you. I froze. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. My fork was still in my hand, hovering over mashed potatoes that had gone cold. My father cleared his throat and looked away. Uncle Richard smirked. And Emily, she didn't look surprised at all. She looked ready. It hit me then, I hadn't just shared good news. I'd stepped into a trap I didn't even know was waiting for me. The silence after my mother's words was worse than shouting. It had weight to it, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see if I would argue, waiting to see if I would comply. Emily broke the pause with a soft laugh that carried an edge of satisfaction. She straightened in her chair, smoothing her napkin as if she were preparing to take on some new role. It makes sense, she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I've been struggling for years. You're fine, Daniel. You don't need a house. Her confidence made me blink. She spoke as though the decision had already been made, as though the ink was already dry on paperwork that handed her what I'd worked so hard for. I managed a smile, thin, strained, and humorless. Emily, I worked for this. I saved for nearly 10 years. That's exactly why you should share, my mother snapped, her voice rising above the clatter of dishes. You've always been the responsible one, Daniel. You've always had your head on straight. Your sister hasn't had your advantages. Advantages? The word almost made me laugh. My advantages were 12-hour shifts, a decade of hand-me-down furniture, and a car with a broken AC that turned summers into an endurance test. Emily, on the other hand, had the advantage of moving back home rent-free every time she lost a job or got bored of school. She'd enrolled in 2 different community colleges, dropped out of both, and spent most of her 20s working part-time retail gigs that never lasted more than 6 months. What advantages? I asked, my voice low, almost calm. Don't get defensive, my father interjected, not looking up from his plate. His voice had that gruff, end-of-discussion tone he used when I was a teenager. You're older, Daniel. You're established. Emily's the one who needs a start in life. She's 29, I said flatly. She's still young, my Uncle Richard chimed in, smirking as he speared another piece of turkey. You're 34. You're set in your ways. Don't be selfish. That word again. Selfish. As though saving every dime, denying myself luxuries, and grinding away at a job that left me drained every night was an act of hoarding rather than survival. Emily leaned forward, her eyes bright with something close to excitement. If it's already bought, just transfer it. A name change. It's easy, right? She said it like she was asking me to pass the salt. No hesitation, no shame. Just an expectation that I'd hand over the keys, the deed, the culmination of a decade of my life. My mother reached out and touched my arm, her voice softening into something dangerously close to pity. It's the right thing to do, Daniel. Family comes first. I looked around the table, searching for even one person who might stand up for me. Aunt Laura kept her head down, fussing with her wine glass. My cousin Jason suddenly found his phone very interesting. The entire table had silently shifted into alignment against me. And in that moment, I understood something chilling. This wasn't a spontaneous idea. This was rehearsed. Discussed. Maybe not word for word, but the groundwork had been laid long before I walked through the door tonight. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay level. No. It's not happening. The words landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading, faces hardening. Emily's smile flickered, then returned stronger. You'll come around, she said lightly, as though I hadn't spoken at all. Mom's right. It's the fair thing to do. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pound my fists on the table and shout that I had bled for this, that I had lived like a monk while she flitted from job to job, relationship to relationship, without consequences. But I didn't. Because something in her eyes told me that was exactly what she wanted, a tantrum, a loss of control, something she could spin into proof that I didn't deserve what I'd earned. So I stayed quiet. I finished my meal in silence, each bite of turkey and stuffing turning to ash in my mouth. When dessert came out, pumpkin pie with whipped cream, Emily was already telling my cousin how she couldn't wait to decorate her new place. She said it with a smirk, loud enough that I couldn't pretend not to hear. And no one corrected her. Not my parents. Not my uncle. Not my aunt. Not even Jason, who knew better. They just let her words hang in the air, unchallenged, as if the ownership had already shifted. I sat there, fork in hand, the sweetness of the pie coating my tongue like glue, realizing that I hadn't walked into a family gathering tonight. I had walked into an ambush. And the worst part? I hadn't seen it coming. I don't remember the drive home clearly. The neighborhood Christmas lights blurred together into a smear of red and green against the windshield, and the road stretched ahead in a haze. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles white, the leather squeaking under my palms. Dinner had ended with forced laughter and obligatory hugs, but underneath the surface, the message had been clear. I was expected to hand over everything I had worked for. Not asked, expected. By the time I reached my apartment, the anger had started to crystallize into something colder. Not rage, not the kind that burns bright and fizzles fast, but a quiet, steady fury. The kind that sharpens. The kind that waits. Inside, I didn't even bother taking off my coat. I went straight to my desk, powered up my laptop, and opened the folders I'd guarded like treasure. Every document, every PDF, every scanned receipt. The down payment transfer, $42,000 pulled from my savings account in a single wire. The lender's approval letter, dated and signed. The purchase contract with my initials on every page. The deed, stamped and filed with the county recorder's office. My fortress wasn't made of brick and mortar alone, it was built from timestamps, signatures, and transaction IDs. They wanted to paint me as selfish, greedy. But numbers didn't lie. Paper trails didn't bend to guilt. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the monitor, and thought about the conversation at dinner. My mother's disappointed glare, my father's silent complicity, Uncle Richard's smirk, and Emily's smug certainty. It hadn't been surprise on her face when I mentioned the property, it had been recognition. She'd known this was coming. Maybe she'd even helped plant the idea. The thought made my stomach twist. Emily and I had never been close. She was the youngest, the golden child, the one everyone excused because she was still finding herself. Growing up, I was the one expected to set an example. I got the grades, I held the jobs, I paid my way. She got the leniency, the sympathy, the endless second chances. And now, apparently, she was supposed to get my house too. I opened a new document and began typing. Not a diary entry, not a rant, just a timeline. A factual record of what had happened at dinner. Who said what, in what order, their exact words as best as I could remember. You need to put it in Emily's name. She deserves it more than you. You don't need a house. Don't be selfish. The phrases echoed in my head as I typed them out, each keystroke hammering the memory into permanence. Evidence, even anecdotal, mattered. If this escalated, I wanted a record. Around midnight, I finally kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed with a text, Emily. Thanks for finally doing something right. I'll start looking at furniture. XO. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. She wasn't just assuming she'd wear me down, she was already acting like the house was hers. The audacity would have been laughable if it hadn't been so dangerous. I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted the message, saved it in a folder labeled House, Evidence, and turned off my phone. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hiss of the radiator. My mind replayed every sacrifice I'd made to get here. The overtime shifts, the years of saying no to myself, the constant grind. None of them had been there for that. None of them had seen the weight of it. But they felt entitled to the reward. And that's when the cold fury settled fully into me. I realized I couldn't just defend myself against their greed, I had to expose it. Not with shouting or emotional appeals, but with precision. With proof. With a strategy so airtight that when the time came, their words and actions would condemn them more effectively than I ever could. My family thought they knew me. They thought I was quiet, compliant, unwilling to rock the boat. What they didn't know was that my entire life had been preparation for this kind of fight. I deal in systems. In audits. In logs. And from that night forward, my family became just another system for me to dissect, every weakness catalogued, every inconsistency logged, every manipulation documented. They thought guilt would be enough to take what was mine. They had no idea what I was about to build. The next morning, I woke to the pale gray light of winter leaking through my blinds. My head felt heavy, but not from wine, though I'd had 2 glasses, I'd sobered quickly enough during dinner. No, this was the weight of calculation, of strategy already forming in the back of my mind. The apartment was cold, the old radiator clanking like it was protesting the demand. I brewed coffee, black, no cream, no sugar, and sat back down at my desk. The folders from last night were still open on my laptop, each one filled with digital artifacts of the life I'd built in secret. It wasn't enough to know I owned the property. I needed to prove it, irrefutably, in ways no one could twist. My family might argue, might guilt, might manipulate, but they couldn't erase numbers. So I got to work. First, I pulled the closing statement from my lender, a 37-page PDF detailing every dollar that had changed hands during the purchase. Wire transfer records, itemized fees, signatures from both buyer and seller, notarized acknowledgments with exact timestamps. Page after page of verifiable reality. I printed 2 copies. One for my safe at home, one for a fireproof lockbox I decided I would rent at the bank. Then came the bank statements. I logged into my account, scrolling back through years of careful deposits, watching the numbers grow month after month, sacrifice by sacrifice. I highlighted every line related to the house purchase, wire transfers, appraisal fees, inspection payments, mortgage drafts. Each transaction was a breadcrumb in a trail leading directly to me. I downloaded them, labeled them meticulously, statement_July. PDF, statement_August. PDF, wire confirmation _sep12.pdf. By noon, I had a digital fortress. A mirrored archive on 2 encrypted drives, plus cloud backups hidden in folders no one would stumble across. But I wasn't finished. I drove to the county recorder's office downtown. The building smelled of dust and bureaucracy, old carpet and toner. I stood in line behind 2 contractors pulling permits and a woman arguing about zoning maps, and when it was my turn, I asked for a certified copy of my deed. The clerk, a weary man with reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose, handed me the document with a seal pressed deep into the paper. It was heavy, substantial, undeniable. I slid it into a folder, my pulse slowing for the first time since Christmas dinner. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with another message from Emily. We should go shopping this weekend. Need to figure out what colors I want for the living room. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She was broadcasting her intentions, assuming I was too weak, or too guilty, to resist. I pulled into a gas station, parked under the harsh fluorescent lights, and read the message twice. Then I screenshotted it, timestamp and all, and added it to the house evidence folder. Every message she sent was ammunition, proof of her entitlement. At home, I began keeping a log. Not just a diary, but an evidentiary record. Date, time, message content, phone numbers. I treated it like an audit trail. If I ever needed to defend myself legally, or even socially, I would have more than memory on my side. The more I compiled, the calmer I felt. This was what I knew how to do. Systems, structures, defenses. My family wanted me vulnerable, emotional, reactive. Instead, I was becoming methodical, deliberate, untouchable. That night, I sat in the half-dark of my apartment, the glow of my monitor casting everything in cold blue light. I scrolled through the files, through the PDFs and screenshots and logs, and I realized something important. This wasn't just about protecting what was mine anymore. This was about exposure. For years, I'd watched Emily get away with everything. Lies, failures, irresponsibility, all smoothed over by my parents' endless excuses. And now, they were trying to rewrite reality itself, to pretend her lack of effort entitled her to my sacrifice. If they wanted to drag this fight into the shadows of manipulation, I would drag it into the light of evidence. They thought family guilt was stronger than proof. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first real sign that Emily wasn't bluffing came 3 days after Christmas. I was at work, buried in a system audit for a major shipping client, when my phone buzzed with a string of messages. At first, I ignored them, alerts from a family group chat I usually muted during business hours. But when I finally checked during my lunch break, my jaw tightened. Emily had posted a selfie from a furniture showroom. Behind her stood a sectional couch and a wall of sample fabrics. The caption read, "Picking out stuff for my new place. Big changes coming less than 3." The responses made my stomach drop. Aunt Laura, so proud of you, sweetie. Uncle Richard, finally settling down. About time. My mother, looks great. Make sure you measure first. Not one person asked the obvious question, whose place? They all played along, either convinced by her confidence or too willing to suspend disbelief. And my silence, I realized, made me complicit. I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted the post, saved it to my house evidence folder, and set my phone down. But the pit in my stomach didn't ease. By that weekend, Emily had escalated further. She came by my apartment unannounced, something she rarely did, and stood in the doorway like she already owned the place. "We should go together," she said, brushing past me into the living room. "The furniture store has a sale on dining sets." I was thinking modern farmhouse, maybe reclaimed wood. It'll look perfect in the house. I closed the door slowly, studying her. My house. She rolled her eyes, as though I'd missed the joke. Oh, Daniel. Don't be like that. Everyone agrees this is the right thing. It's basically mine already. You're just dragging your feet. I stared at her, 1,000 retorts rising in my throat. But instead of arguing, I pulled out my phone, pressed record, and set it on the coffee table. She didn't even notice. You can keep some stuff there if you want, she went on breezily, flipping through a design magazine she'd brought with her. Like, if you need a place to crash. But it'll be my home. I've already told Jenna and Melissa, they're so excited for me. Finally some stability, you know? Every word was damning. Her tone was casual, her body language relaxed, but her entitlement was absolute. She wasn't asking. She was narrating a future she believed was inevitable. When she finally left, after nearly an hour of rambling about paint swatches and her plans for the backyard, I stopped the recording and saved it. Labeled, timestamped, backed up. Another piece of ammunition. Over the next 2 weeks, the story spread. Friends tagged Emily in posts about interior design. Extended relatives messaged me privately with congratulations on helping her get on her feet. One even asked if I planned to buy another house for myself now that I'd done the right thing. The anger in me simmered. I wasn't losing just the credit for what I'd achieved, I was being erased from my own story. I doubled down on my documentation. Every message, every conversation, every post went into the archive. I organized the folder by category: texts, social posts, recordings, legal docs. My system grew like a case file, neat and undeniable. At night, when the apartment was quiet, I would sit at my desk and scroll through the evidence. It didn't make me feel better, it made me colder, steadier. If this went public, if I had to expose the truth, I wanted the blow to be surgical, not messy. And still, Emily pressed forward. One evening, she called me out of the blue. So I told work I'm moving soon, she said cheerfully. They're all so happy for me. I might even host a housewarming. Can you believe it? Yes, I said flatly. I can believe it. She didn't notice the edge in my voice. Because Emily wasn't living in the real world anymore. She was living in a fantasy of her own entitlement, and the family was feeding it. But fantasies have a way of collapsing under the weight of facts. And I was building a mountain of them. The first week of January, while Emily paraded around as though she'd already won, I shifted gears. I knew from experience that emotions could cloud judgment, and clouded judgment loses wars. What I needed wasn't another shouting match or a futile attempt to convince my family with words. I needed knowledge, leverage, and certainty. So I began my investigation. The first stop was my mortgage lender. I scheduled an appointment under the pretense of wanting to fully understand the paperwork. In truth, I wanted clarity. Could anyone move this house into someone else's name without my direct consent? The answer, delivered by a patient loan officer in a sterile office smelling faintly of carpet cleaner, was simple. No. You are the sole borrower, the sole deed holder. No transfer can happen without your signed authorization, notarized and filed with the county. If anyone tries, it would be fraud. She slid a brochure across the desk, a bland pamphlet about protecting your property rights. It outlined scenarios where ownership disputes could arise: divorces, inheritance battles, fraudulent transfers. Each scenario ended with the same advice: document everything, and never sign what you don't fully understand. I left with the pamphlet tucked neatly in my folder, but more importantly, I left with calm certainty. Emily couldn't simply take what was mine. She could scheme, manipulate, or try to coerce, but the law was on my side. Still, I wasn't about to underestimate her. The next day, I drove to the county recorder's office again. This time, I asked not only for another certified copy of my deed, but also for a search of any recent filings against the property. The clerk, a woman with nails painted a chipped maroon, tapped at her computer and shook her head. Nothing new. Clean file. I made her print the confirmation anyway, a sheet of paper with the county seal and timestamp. Proof that, as of that date, my property was uncontested. Back home, I built a binder. A literal, physical binder, tabbed and color-coded: legal documents, bank statements, communications, property records. Each section was filled with copies, neatly organized. I kept the original certified deed in a fireproof safe I purchased that same week. At night, I dug deeper. I researched case law, examples of family members attempting fraudulent transfers, siblings suing siblings, parents trying to coerce ownership changes. I read about inheritance disputes that dragged on for years, about forged signatures, About people losing everything because they hadn't documented enough. I wasn't going to be one of them. Emily kept texting during this time. Little reminders of her fantasy, thinking about painting the master bedroom a sage green. Jenna's husband said he can help with moving furniture when the time comes. When do you think you'll be ready to hand over the keys? Each message made me colder, not hotter. I screenshotted them, cataloged them, backed them up. Each one was another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. The more I researched, the more I realized I had options. I could place a notice of interest on the property, making it harder for anyone to even attempt fraudulent filings. I could pay a small fee to receive alerts from the county if any document was filed under my address, essentially setting a tripwire. I did both. And then I started looking at Emily differently. Not just as my sister, but as a risk profile. She was impulsive, careless, but also manipulative. She thrived on narratives, on convincing others to believe her version of events. That was her strength. Mine was verifiable proof. By mid-January, I had transformed my anxiety into a system. The binder sat on my desk, growing thicker by the day. The digital archive mirrored it, backed up 3 ways. The county alert system was live. The safe was bolted to the floor in my closet. Emily thought I was silent because I was wavering. The truth was, I was silent because I was preparing. I wasn't just protecting my house. I was laying the groundwork for something far bigger, exposure. Because if Emily was arrogant enough to believe she could rewrite reality, then I was going to make sure that when the truth came out, it hit her like a hammer. And I wouldn't need to raise my voice to do it. By the 3rd week of January, the whispers had turned into open pressure. Emily wasn't content with group chat hints or Instagram posts anymore. She was accelerating, and she was dragging the rest of the family with her. It started with unannounced visits. One Friday night, after a grueling 12-hour shift auditing error logs for a client rollout, I came home to find my parents' car parked outside my apartment building. The old Buick was unmistakable, frost clinging to its hood. Inside, my parents were waiting in the lobby, sitting stiffly on the cracked vinyl couch under the buzzing fluorescent lights. "Daniel," my mother said as I walked in, her tone clipped, rehearsed. "We need to talk." Upstairs, in my apartment, the conversation unfolded like a script. My father sat silent, staring at the floor, while my mother leaned forward on the couch, hands clasped like a preacher about to deliver a sermon. "Emily needs this," she began, her voice heavy with practiced sorrow. "She's been adrift for too long. You know how hard it's been for her. You're stable, Daniel. You can always buy another property. But this could change her life." I let her words hang in the air before answering. It already changed mine. She frowned, as though I'd given the wrong answer on a test. "Don't be selfish. Think of the family." There it was again. Selfish. The word they wielded like a blade, cutting into any defense I tried to raise. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply reached into my desk, pulled out the certified copy of my deed, and placed it on the coffee table. The embossed seal caught the lamplight. "This is mine," I said quietly. "It's not up for discussion." My father shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My mother's lips tightened, but she didn't touch the paper. After a long pause, she stood, muttering something about me being cold and unfeeling. They left without saying goodbye. I recorded the entire interaction. The next day, Emily called. Not to ask, but to accuse. "You embarrassed Mom and Dad. They came over to talk, and you shoved paperwork in their faces. That's cruel, Daniel. This isn't about documents, it's about doing what's right." "Right for who?" I asked. "For your family," she said, as if the answer was obvious. "For me." I didn't respond. I saved the call log, timestamp and all. By the end of the month, the pressure had become relentless. Angry texts, guilt-laden voicemails, subtle digs in the family group chat. Aunt Laura posted a vague meme about greedy people who forget where they came from. My uncle asked me directly if I was too good to share now. Even my cousin Jason, usually quiet, sent me a message. "Why not just help her out? It's family. Don't make this harder than it has to be." They weren't just circling anymore. They were closing in. But with every demand, my resolve hardened. I logged everything. I bought a second backup drive, encrypted it, and stored it at work. I began carrying a small pocket recorder, clicking it on during phone calls and unexpected encounters. The more they pushed, the more meticulous I became. One night, Emily showed up again, this time with 2 of her friends. They stood in my hallway, arms folded, smirking like enforcers. "We're just here to help you see reason," one of them said. Emily leaned against the doorframe, her voice syrupy sweet. Don't make this ugly, Daniel. Everyone knows it's already mine. Why fight it? I kept my expression neutral, my voice calm. Leave. They did, but not before Emily whispered, you'll regret dragging this out. That night, I typed the words into my log verbatim. The pressure cooker was reaching its boiling point, but they didn't realize something crucial. I was the one controlling the heat. Every message, every visit, every veiled threat, it all went into the record. They thought they were wearing me down. In reality, they were building my case for me. And when the time came, I wouldn't just defend myself. I would expose them. By February, the constant pressure had become predictable. Emily and my parents rotated tactics. One day it was guilt, the next it was flattery, and when those failed, it was veiled threats. But patterns are predictable, and predictability can be exploited. That's when I decided it was time to stop just collecting evidence passively. I needed to engineer it. The first trap was simple, a conversation baited with a question. I called Emily one evening, putting her on speakerphone while my recorder ran in the background. I started light, asking about her job at the boutique that she'd recently quit, again. After a few minutes, I dropped it casually. So, you really think the house is yours? Her laugh was sharp. Of course it is. Mom and Dad said it's the right thing. Everyone knows you'll hand it over eventually. You don't need it. I pressed. But legally, it's in my name. The deed, the mortgage, all of it. Details, she scoffed. Paperwork doesn't matter. Family matters. And you don't want to be the villain, do you? The arrogance in her voice was staggering. She wasn't just confident, she was convinced. I let her talk, saying as little as possible. Every word was captured, saved, backed up. The second trap was social. I created a new email account under a neutral name and sent her a message pretending to be from a local furniture store's promotions team. The email offered a discount for new homeowners and asked for the legal name to put on the invoice. Within a day, she replied with her own name, signing off confidently as if she were already listed as the owner. I filed it under communications greater than false claims. The third trap required patience. At my parents' next Sunday dinner, a smaller gathering this time, I casually steered the conversation back to the house. I mentioned how expensive repairs were, how much the utilities cost, dropping the bait to see who would bite. Emily didn't hesitate. Don't worry. Once it's in my name, I'll take care of it. I've already talked to people about renovations. I looked her dead in the eye. In your name? She didn't flinch. Obviously. That's the plan. My parents said nothing. My father chewed his food in silence. My mother gave a small, approving nod. I'd placed my phone under my napkin before the meal started, recording the entire exchange. By this point, my archive had grown to the size of a small legal case file. Screen recordings of text messages. Audio clips of conversations. Screenshots of social posts. Even metadata, the timestamps, phone numbers, locations whenever possible. My binder at home had become a brick of proof, heavy and undeniable. But I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. Exposure required timing, precision. You don't just fire a weapon the second you load it, you wait until the target is in the open. So I began planning the next step, escalation by proxy. If Emily believed she had already won, I wanted her to say it in front of more people, louder, bolder. Arrogance has a way of drawing out confessions, and Emily's arrogance was endless. I started dropping hints. A casual remark in the family group chat, repairs on the house are piling up. Not sure how much more I want to put in. Emily responded exactly as I hoped, don't worry. Once it's mine, I'll handle it. Aunt Laura chimed in with clapping emojis. Uncle Richard with a smug thumbs up. I said nothing, but I saved everything. The trap wasn't fully sprung yet. I wasn't ready to reveal my hand. But every word they gave me was another piece of rope. And the longer they kept talking, the more rope they wrapped around themselves. At night, sitting at my desk with the glow of the monitor washing over me, I reviewed the growing archive. My heart didn't race anymore when I read their words. My pulse stayed steady, my breathing even. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was orchestrating. They thought they were grinding me down with pressure. In reality, I was tightening the net around them. And soon, I'd be ready to pull it closed. Arrogance makes noise. It taps its foot on tile floors, laughs too loudly, and forgets that microphones don't care about intentions. By mid-February, Emily's confidence was a drumbeat in every room she entered. I just had to be in the right room, with the right recorder, when it finally turned into a confession. The setup came from an unlikely source, my cousin Jason. He texted me on a Thursday night at 8:12 p.m. I remember the timestamp because I screenshotted it the second it came in. Jason, 8:12 p.m. Dude, M keeps saying you're handing over the house this month. Is that true? Me, 8:13 p.m. No. Why? Jason, 8:15 p.m. She's telling people she's got a plan if you don't. Something about making sure you can't say no. Making sure I can't say no could mean a lot of things, most of them ugly. Coercion. Lies. Or something more formal, like trying to get our parents to pressure me into signing a temporary transfer that would never be undone. I thanked Jason, told him to keep his ears open, and filed the screenshots under comms greater than third-party reports. Hearsay wasn't enough, but it told me the right direction to point the camera. The opportunity arrived 2 days later, on a Saturday, at a place Emily loved, Café Linea, a glass and steel box downtown with a neon sign and too much echo. She texted at 10:06 a.m., "Meet me. 1 p.m. Don't be dramatic. We'll settle this." The phrasing made me smile. People who plan ambushes always call their targets dramatic. I prep like I do for deployments at work. I charge 2 devices, my phone and a slim voice recorder that fits under a watch band. I check storage. I opened a notes doc for contemporaneous logging. I wore a shirt with a button pocket and clipped a micro camera inside it, lens peeking through the stitching. Overkill? Maybe. But overkill looks a lot like undeniable after the fact. At 12:52 p.m., I parked across from the cafe and typed the first entry in my log. February 17, 2024, 12:52 and 33 seconds, arrived at Café Linea. Weather 39 degrees Fahrenheit, overcast. Seating map, central communal table, 2 camera domes in ceiling, northwest corner, above espresso bar. Audio level high, but manageable. I walked in at 12:58. Emily was already there, posture perfect, a dotted notebook open in front of her like a contract waiting for a signature. She'd done her hair. She wore a blazer. Performative professionalism. "You're late," she said, glancing at the wall clock even though my phone said I wasn't. She wanted control before we even sat. "I'm here," I said, and took the seat across from her. My phone sat on the table screen down, the recorder clipped to my belt, the micro cam already rolling. The cafe's ceiling cam blinked in the corner of my eye, insurance policy I didn't even have to pay for. Emily didn't waste time. She tapped her notebook. "So, there are 2 options. You sign a transfer. We file it with the county. Everyone's happy. Or," she smiled, "an ugly little thing, we do it the other way." "What's the other way?" I kept my voice flat. She leaned in. "You remember when you had that panic attack last year? At work? Mom told me." She let the pause do the work. "It wouldn't be hard to make a case that you're not thinking clearly right now. Temporary guardianship. Power of attorney. Just until the house is in safer hands." I let the words settle, let the cafe noise fill the space around us, cups clinking, steam wands hissing, someone laughing too loud by the window. Then I asked it, simple as a checkbox, "Are you saying you plan to take the house if I don't sign?" Her eyes glittered. "I'm saying I'll protect our family from your selfishness. If you won't do the right thing willingly, we'll do it the smart way." There it was. Not a nudge. A plan. A stated intent to strip me of authority and property under a pretext she knew was false. I kept my face blank and asked a second, cleaner question, the kind a lawyer would write. "Are you admitting you intend to use a guardianship or power of attorney claim to move the house into your name if I refuse to transfer it?" She smiled, victorious. "Yes." I didn't flinch. I didn't look down at the pocket where the tiny camera was recording both of our faces, the timestamp burning digits into the bottom frame, 13:06 and 41 seconds. 13:06 and 42 seconds. I didn't even look at my phone, which was collecting clean audio and, more importantly, cafe ambient that would sync perfectly with the ceiling camera if I had to subpoena the footage. I just nodded once, as if she'd finally said something reasonable, and let her keep talking, and she did. The floodgates opened. Emily bragged about conversations with our mother, with Aunt Laura, with Uncle Richard. She mentioned papers a friend of a friend could draft. She described the story they'd use, that I'd been erratic, that I'd made threats, I hadn't, that I was unsafe with money, my statements would laugh. She even said the quiet part out loud, "Once the title's in my name, there's nothing to undo. No one fights that hard to get it back." I asked a third question, soft. "So the goal is to get the title recorded in your name. Period." "Obviously," she said. "That's the only part that matters. After that, we can reevaluate and maybe put you on the deed again, if you behave. She raised her coffee like she'd made a toast. I made one note in my phone, thumbs moving like a bored brother, 1312, explicit intent, guardianship talk title transfer no reversal. Then I looked up, steady. You've told other people this plan? Everyone, she said, and laughed. It's not a plan if no one knows about it. We stayed 23 minutes. I know because the device clocked 0:23 and 14 seconds when I stopped it outside, behind the bike rack where I could see both cafe windows and my reflection in the glass, jaw set, posture calm. I didn't go home. I walked half a block to a notary kiosk that shares space with a shipping store and, at 1:41 p.m., paid for a time-stamped affidavit service, essentially a notary witness declaration that I possessed a digital recording created on a specific date and time. It doesn't replace the recording itself, but it's a chain of custody anchor. I uploaded the file to a fresh cloud drive while I stood at the counter, then again to a second provider from the bench outside. Redundancy is king. That night, I wrote a contemporaneous memo, 1 page, crisp and dry. Memo to file, February 17, 2024, 1904. Location, Café Linea, 1300 hours to 1323. Present, Daniel Cross, me, Emily Cross, sister. Statements: Emily Cross confirmed intention to secure property title via guardianship/POA pretext if voluntary transfer not executed, acknowledging irreversibility as objective. Mentioned Confederates, mother, Aunt Laura, Uncle Richard. Evidence: video, device ID MC041, audio, iPhone voice memos February 17, 2024 13_00, notary affidavit hashtag A7719 timestamp February 17, 2024 1341. Next steps: preserve, identify third-party corroboration, Café CCTV, collect additional admissions. Then I emailed Café Linea's generic address requesting their footage for a personal matter involving potential fraud, offering to compensate processing costs. I knew I couldn't demand it, not yet. But I also knew businesses overwrite footage on cycles. A polite flag sometimes buys you 72 hours. At 9:26 p.m., Emily texted again, giddy, glad we cleared that up. Give me a few dates next week to sign and we'll avoid the messy route. I didn't reply. I saved it. I exported the entire day's thread as a PDF, preserving Apple's tiny gray timestamps like beads on a chain. The last piece locked into place 2 days later when the cafe manager replied. They'd preserve the North Cam archive from 12:45 to 13:45 for 14 days pending any legal request. I printed the email, saved the headers, and added it to evidence greater than third party greater than Linea. Everything about the confession was ordinary on the surface: a coffee, a sibling spat, a smug smile. But ordinary makes the best evidence because it doesn't look staged. It looks like truth you can rewind. I'd walked into that cafe with a net. Emily swam straight into it, tangled herself, and kept thrashing until the knots cinched tight. Now I had her words, her intent, the place, the time, the corroboration vector, and a chain of custody trail that started minutes after the conversation and never broke. They wanted to make sure I couldn't say no. Now I didn't have to say anything at all. The record would speak for me, and it would be loud. Family gatherings always smell the same in my parents' house: baked ham, overcooked vegetables, and too much perfume lingering in the air. On the second Sunday of March, I walked into that familiar storm cloud of scents knowing it would be the last time things were ever the same. Emily was already there, perched at the oak dining table like a queen waiting for her coronation. She wore a new dress, hair curled, makeup done. On the surface, it was Sunday dinner. Underneath, it was her victory lap. I'd spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Files duplicated, backups secured, documents notarized. The confession from Café Linea was cataloged 6 different ways, cross-verified against metadata. The email from the cafe manager preserving CCTV was printed and folded into my binder. Every smug text Emily had sent, every voicemail, every family chat log, compiled, indexed, and ready. When I set the binder down on the table that evening, the sound was deliberate, a heavy thud that silenced the room. My father's fork froze halfway to his mouth. My mother glanced at the binder as if it were radioactive. Emily smirked. "What's that?" she asked. "Records," I said evenly. "Evidence." "Evidence of what?" My mother's tone was already defensive. I didn't answer. Instead, I flipped open the binder, sliding the first page across the table. A certified copy of my deed, seal embossed, time-stamped. "This is my house. Filed with the county, recorded in September. Sole owner, Daniel Cross. Emily rolled her eyes. We've been through this. That's just paperwork. The second page hit the table. A transcript of her texts, screenshotted, exported, timestamped. The line about painting the master bedroom. The one about telling her boss she was moving. The housewarming message. That's you, I said quietly. Claiming ownership of something that isn't yours. Her smirk faltered, but she leaned back in her chair. So? Everyone knows it's happening. Stop being dramatic. The third page was heavier, a notarized affidavit from February 17, with the notary seal in blue ink. That's a chain of custody record for a video. A recording of you, in a cafe, explaining your plan to file fraudulent guardianship paperwork to force me to transfer the house into your name. You admitted it. Word for word. The room went still. My father's eyes widened. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. Emily laughed nervously. You can't prove that. I reached into the binder pocket, pulled out a USB drive, and slid it across the table. This is the audio. Backed up to 3 cloud drives. Synced with cafe CCTV that the manager agreed to preserve. Your voice. Your words. Your face, timestamped down to the second. Emily's hand twitched toward the USB, but she didn't touch it. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp. You didn't just lie. You plotted. You tried to weaponize mom and dad, to drag other family into it. You told people it was already yours. You tried to erase me from my own work, my own sacrifice. And you thought I wouldn't fight back. Silence. My Aunt Laura finally broke it with a weak laugh. Well, maybe this is just a misunderstanding. I cut her off by turning a page. No misunderstanding. Here's Emily's email to a furniture store claiming she was the homeowner. Here's a text where she told me she'd make sure I couldn't say no. Here's Jason's message about her bragging she had a plan if I didn't comply. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair but didn't deny it. The weight of the evidence filled the room. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. It was verifiable, time-stamped, undeniable. Emily's face went pale. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback ready. This is fraud, I said quietly. If I took this to the county, to the police, to a lawyer, you'd be finished. I haven't done that yet, because I wanted everyone here to see the truth first. No spin. No lies. Just proof. The silence stretched until it snapped. My mother spoke, her voice brittle. Daniel. You didn't have to humiliate her like this. I turned my gaze to her, steady and unflinching. No. She did that herself. The binder sat between us like a loaded weapon, every page another bullet. And for the first time, the table that had always been their ground, where guilt was leveraged, where pressure was applied, was mine. The truth was out. The evidence was undeniable. And the silence around me was the sound of their empire of entitlement collapsing. Silence is a strange thing. At a family dinner, it never lasts. Someone always coughs, scrapes a fork, shifts in their seat. But that night, after I laid out the binder and the evidence, silence wrapped itself around the table like a shroud. Emily stared at me, her mouth half open, but no words came out. The smirk that had been welded to her face for months was gone, replaced by something brittle. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, picking at her nails. For the first time, she looked cornered. My father was the first to move. He pushed back his chair with a groan and stood, pacing toward the window. He didn't speak, didn't look at me, didn't even look at Emily. Just rubbed his forehead as though the weight of what he'd ignored was finally pressing down. My mother broke the silence next. Daniel, she said softly, almost pleading, you didn't have to go this far. I looked at her evenly. I didn't have to? You sat here week after week and let her claim something that wasn't hers. You told me I should give away what I worked for because she deserved it more. And when she planned to commit fraud, you nodded along. Her lips tightened, but she had no rebuttal. Across the table, Aunt Laura shifted uncomfortably, muttering something about family airing dirty laundry. Uncle Richard gave a low whistle, shaking his head like this was a juicy piece of gossip rather than a scandal he'd helped nurture. But their usual smugness had dulled. No one wanted to be on Emily's side anymore. Not with timestamps, transcripts, and recorded confessions staring them down. Emily finally snapped. This doesn't mean anything. You think waving around papers makes you the hero? It's just your word against mine. Play the recording, Jason said quietly. His voice cut through sharper than I expected. If you're so sure it's nothing, let's hear it. Emily's head whipped toward him, betrayal flashing in her eyes. But she saw what I saw. Jason wasn't protecting me out of loyalty. He was protecting himself. He'd been the one to warn me she was bragging. If the ship was sinking, he wanted to make sure he wasn't dragged down with it. I didn't even need to press play. The suggestion alone was enough to twist the knife. Emily slammed her hand on the table, muttering something about me being obsessed and vindictive. But it was too late. The shift had already happened. The power she'd wielded, the smirks, the implied inevitability, the way everyone nodded when she spoke, was gone. In its place was a raw, ugly tension. No one wanted to look her in the eye. My mother fidgeted with her napkin, my father stayed at the window, my aunt and uncle exchanged uneasy glances. The silence wasn't protection anymore, it was condemnation. Dinner ended quickly after that. Plates were cleared without a word. Chairs scraped back. No hugs at the door, no polite drive safe. Just a cold scattering of people who had been caught standing too close to a fire when it finally went out of control. I left last, binder under my arm. Emily sat in her chair still, arms crossed, face pale with fury. She didn't look at me as I walked past. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like cracks in glass. Family group chats went dormant. Aunt Laura unfriended Emily on Facebook after a blowout argument over spreading lies. Uncle Richard stopped returning her calls. Jason quietly reached out to me again, asking if I was going public with the recordings. I told him nothing, but noted his sudden eagerness to stay on my good side. My parents. They were harder. My mother left voicemails, some pleading, some angry, each one ending with the same refrain, "You didn't have to humiliate her." My father didn't call at all. When he finally texted, it was 3 words, "It's done now." As for Emily, she doubled down at first. She posted cryptic messages online about toxic siblings and betrayal, fishing for sympathy. But sympathy is fickle. Without family backing her story, her friends began asking questions she couldn't answer. Screenshots of her posts circulated. People noticed the silence from her parents, her aunt, her uncle. By April, the messages had stopped. No more taunts about paint colors or furniture sales. No more smug hints about her place. Just silence. But it wasn't victory I felt. Not exactly. What I felt was something colder, steadier, the satisfaction of truth standing unshaken. They had tried to make me doubt myself, to make me hand over my future with nothing but guilt and pressure. Instead, I had forced them to face what they really were, complicit in a theft that never succeeded. The bonds between us would never be the same. Maybe they would mend in time, maybe not. But I didn't need their approval anymore. Because the house was still mine. And so was the truth. April thinned into May the way winter lets go of a stubborn branch, reluctantly, then all at once. I stopped checking the family thread every morning. The binder sat upright on my desk like a spine, its tabs bristling. Some nights I left it open, other nights I slid it into the safe, spun the dial, and listened to the bolts settle with a heavy metallic certainty. I'd built a wall of fact, now I had to build my life behind it. I started with the simple things, the physical perimeter. A locksmith replaced both exterior deadbolts with grade 1 hardware and rekeyed the side door. I added strike plates with 3-inch screws that bit clean into the framing and a smart lock with an audit trail that recorded every entry attempt, time, failure or success, and an ID. 2 exterior cameras went up under the eaves. Not paranoia, documentation. The footage rolled to local storage and to a cloud account only I could access. I tested notifications twice, once at 9:07 p.m. and once at 5:43 a.m., just to see the timestamps light my phone. Then I addressed the paper perimeter. I retained an attorney on a limited scope engagement, a woman named Hart who read quickly and spoke slowly. In her office, I set the binder between us. She paged through, stopping at the notary affidavit, then the cafe manager's preservation email, then my transcript of Emily's language about guardianship and irreversibility. Hart nodded once and said, "This is clean. You don't need to swing it, you just need it in the room." She drafted 2 letters. The first, a cease and desist address to Emily, no further claims of ownership, no representations to vendors or employers, no attempts to initiate legal action premised on false incapacity. The second, a circumscribed notice to my parents, any pressure to transfer title would be considered undue influence and met with counsel. No threats, no theatrics, just terms. I paid Hart's invoice in full the same day. Line items, times, totals. I filed the PDF alongside the rest, legal greater than counsel greater than Hart _invoice _2024-0422.pdf. A life has a way of feeling steadier when its artifacts line up. After the letters went out, the calls slowed, then stopped. Emily did not reply in writing. She didn't post. Maybe she raged to the ceiling fan or to the friends who had clapped along when she announced her imaginary housewarming. Maybe she sat very still with the knowledge that a roomful of people had watched her plan fall apart. I didn't speculate. I don't track what isn't relevant anymore. I turned my attention back to the property itself, the actual shape of the thing this had all been about. The yard was a patchwork of spring green and stubborn brown. I rented an aerator, crisscrossed the lawn until my calves burned, then overseeded and watered at measured intervals, 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., 10 minutes per zone, a schedule taped to the inside of the shed. I scrubbed the siding with a telescoping brush and a solution that smelled like citrus and ammonia. I replaced a cracked outlet cover on the porch with a weatherproof in-use box and wrapped the terminals with tape that stuck to my fingers. The house answered each repair with a tiny change in tone. The door closed cleaner, the faucet stopped its little cough, the porch light hummed less. Inside, the second bedroom had sat empty for months, a spillover space for boxes and tools. I cleared it, patched nail holes with compound, sanded, and painted it a soft Atlantic gray. I listed it for rent to a single tenant on a month-to-month basis, background check required, quiet hours respected. The listing was plain: 2 windows, clean lines, shared kitchen, proof of income. I met applicants at the dining table with a stack of forms and a calm, neutral tone. On the third interview, a pediatric night nurse named Mara handed me references formatted in a way that made my system's brain hum: dates, contact names, phone numbers that actually rang. I ran the checks, then printed the lease, lines blank for only 2 names, hers and mine. We signed at 1911 in blue ink. I scanned it at 1928 and filed it under property greater than tenancy greater than lease _Mara _2024 0512.pdf. Some would call it moving on. For me, it was something sharper, reasserting the normalcy they had tried to pry from its hinges. Boundaries followed. They weren't declarations, they were structures. I set my phone to filter unknown numbers to voicemail. I created a separate email folder labeled family, view only, and anything that arrived without a request for logistics, holidays, health updates, got archived unread. I gave my parents a new rule that fit into a single sentence: we could talk about weather, work, or meals. Anything else would end the call. The first time my mother started to circle back toward what you did to your sister, I said, weather, work, or meals, and let the silence do the teaching. She chose weather. We talked about late frost and how the daffodils always come up too early. On a Saturday morning, I took the binder out one last time. I sat at the kitchen table, the old pine top I'd sanded myself, the finish still smelling faintly of tung oil, and reviewed the spine from front to back. Deed, bank wires, statements, screenshots, audio logs, transcript excerpts. The notary's angled signature. Hart's letters. Café Ligna's email headers. My own contemporaneous memos written in the neutral voice that had always felt like armor: names, times, actions, nothing else. It read like a story, even if no one else would ever publish it. A beginning where a house was only a line item in a goal, a middle where people decided the line item belonged to them, and an end where the house remained what it had always been, mine, because reality is stubborn when you bolt it down with receipts. I closed the binder and slid it into the safe, then placed something else on top: a thin folder labeled if needed with a USB drive, a printed index, and a 1-page instruction sheet. If I ever had to press go again, if someone decided to test the hinges, the machine would start up in seconds, not days. That's not paranoia. That's maintenance. In June, I received a postcard from Emily. No return address, just a handwriting I'd know if it were scraped into concrete. The front was a beach I've never visited. The back said, "You made this ugly. Hope you're happy in your little fortress." I turned the card over once, then again, and then slid it into a plastic sleeve and filed it under communications greater than post greater than June 3, 2024. I did not reply. Paper is a witness. Let it watch. A week later, a neighbor 2 houses down asked if I could help him lift a water heater from a pickup into his garage. We grunted the cylinder into place, and when we were done, he looked at the fresh paint on my trim and said, "Place looks solid, man." I said, "It is." It sounded like bragging, and maybe it was, but not about paint or trim. He nodded without needing the footnotes. At the end of that month, I walked the perimeter of the house at dusk with a list on a clipboard: exterior outlets, hose bibs, downspouts, fence latches. I put a checkmark beside each item and a small dot when I found a minor issue, a little code only I would understand. As I rounded the corner near the lilac, the motion light clicked on and the siding flashed white, then settled. The camera pinged my phone. 2042 front walk, motion. I smiled at the tiny proof that things were working the way they were supposed to work. I don't think about revenge anymore. Not in the movie sense, the dramatic last word, the crowd, the collapse. The satisfying part was never the spectacle at the table. It was the quiet after, the way a system behaves when aligned. The way a bolt slides home, the way a name on a title holds its shape. Some nights I sit on the back steps with a mug of coffee and listen to the house. The refrigerator kicks on with a low throat clearing. The water heater murmurs. The wind imagines a story through the fence pickets and then forgets it. If a car door thunks on the street, the camera whispers my name, just a vibration at my wrist. Everything logs, everything accounts, everything keeps faith with what happened and how. Once, in July, a text from my mother came through at 7:03 a.m. We're grilling Sunday. You're welcome at 3. Weather looks nice, bring potato salad? Weather, work, or meals? I bought Yukon Golds, chopped dill, whisked Dijon into mayo, and left the binder where it belongs. I stayed an hour and left before the sun dipped. We spoke about corn prices and my father's mower. No one said house. That's not reconciliation. It's a protocol. It holds. People like to pretend justice is a spectacle, but the part that stays is smaller. It's the intact deed tucked in a safe you can open in the dark. It's the inbox that goes quiet. It's a lease signed at 1911 in blue ink. It's the feeling when you pull your own door shut and the latch engages with a clean, unambiguous click. On the first cool night of September, I stood in the hallway with a new smoke detector in my hand, the old one chirping its last protest. I replaced the bracket, twisted the unit until it seated, and held the test button until the tone filled the house and then stopped. I wrote the date on the inside with a Sharpie and climbed down the ladder. In the stillness that followed, I heard exactly what I needed to hear. No voices, no claims, no rehearsed disappointments, just the layered hush of a place doing what places do when no one is trying to steal them. I turned the deadbolt, set the alarm, and the house exhaled. The last sound before sleep was mine.